Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome and thank you for coming to today's session titled The Elephant in the Security Room, Climate Change. And our speaker today is Chloe Mistagi. She is the CEO and founder of Global Secure Partners. Please help me in welcoming her to the stage. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. How's everyone doing today? So we're all here for a controversial topic. This is going to be fun, I promise. So once again, my name is Chloe Mistagi. I just want to do a quick shout out to RSA Conference for accepting a talk like this. I know in today's world, it's a little bit scary sometimes to do talks like this. But I also want to say thank you for being in this room, and I hope you guys appreciate this talk. Once again, my name is Chloe Mistagi. I'm the CEO and founder of Global Secure Partners. And what I do is I work with security teams to make sure that they feel empowered, that they belong in there, and also to make sure you guys don't have as many breaches, making sure your team is less burned out. So let's begin, shall we? So when it comes to climate change in general, we usually don't think about how climate change and cybersecurity play a role together. But the reality is that we have, with climate change, an increase of cyber threats. Climate change can create instability, disruptions that can be exploited by cyber criminals. For example, extreme weather events can damage infrastructure and cause power outages, which can lead to cyber attacks on critical infrastructure. We also have to think about cybersecurity risks to clean energy. As our world shifts towards clean energy, new technologies and systems will be developed and implemented, which will create new cybersecurity risks. And honestly, at the end of the day, us as leaders in this room, we have to be aware of this and ensure the safety of our organizations that we are securing. Now, when it comes to our world and where it is right now, the thing is, at the end of the day, is climate change is a pressing issue. It's kind of when we have these conversations and people are like, well, you know, my opinion of climate change is, or I don't believe in climate change, that is a hoax, or you know what, the earth is always changing throughout thousands of years. But the reality of it is there shouldn't be an opinion on climate change. Having an opinion on what temperature that water boils is the same thing of having an opinion about climate change, whether or not it exists. It exists. And right now, climate change is a pressing issue that is impacting every one of us. A few weeks ago, there was 20 tornadoes within 2 days. California was in an extreme drought, and now it has atmospheric river situation. Good news, we're almost out of the drought, you guys. I'm so excited because June is coming around, and I heard El Nino is coming. So I'm really excited for that. But the thing is that there are devastating impacts that are happening to our world and to the wildlife within it. And a recent research published by the PNS, which is an organization based in Australia, they revealed that within just 50 years from now, 1/3 of our species and animals as we know it will go extinct. And it's truly alarming if you think about it. When we think about climate change, we think about it's the end of the world as we know it. Look, the world's going to still be here, the earth will be fine, it's going to be totally fine on its own. It will find a way to be okay. It will survive, but we just won't be part of it. That's the difference here when we talk about climate change, if we do not make a difference now. Because the reality is, despite global efforts to aim for a target of 1.5 degrees Celsius, it may be more realistic to acknowledge it's going to be more like 2 degrees Celsius if we take drastic changes at this time. And because failing of this means that our planet will warm up to 4 degrees Celsius. And if you're wondering, well, what's the difference between that? Well, the reality is that the Intergovernmental Panel of Climate Change, the IPCC, has projected that under a business as usual scenario, that global temperature could rise from 1.5 to 4.5 degrees Celsius at the end of the century. And for those that don't know Celsius and Fahrenheit, that is 2.7 to 8.1. Now, however, this is a long-term projection, And it does not take into account of potential technology advancements that can change this, or policy changes, or any other factors that can mitigate this climate change issue. The thing is, it's still an issue. And furthermore, there are significant international momentum towards fixing this problem, such as the Paris Agreement. And the Paris Agreement, which was adopted in 2015 by countries around the world, are all trying to keep it at 1.5 and not to go beyond that. But the reality is that we have now come to a point that that's not going to happen. It's almost impossible now at this point. And now it's more about how do we keep it well below 2 degrees Celsius, which for the folks in Fahrenheit, that's 3.6 degrees. And the reality is that's above pre-industrial levels, with the goal of limiting that temperature rise is incredibly important. While achieving this goal will require significant efforts and cooperation, of course, an important step towards reducing the impacts of climate change. Now, to help you understand, because in my mind when I heard 1.5, 2 degrees, I'm like, what does that actually mean? I'm not a climate scientist myself, but to give you an idea, 1.5 degrees Celsius means that, that there's going to be this rising sea levels that will probably outplace, about, I think, if you can't read that orange font, it is 46 million people. Right now, there's climate refugees all around the world that are happening, especially in Bangladesh. A couple of years ago, massive flooding started taking place, and now there's people that are trying to find a new home. Within areas of Guatemala, Honduras, El Salvador, and Mexico, in 2020, that's when we started seeing an even higher increase of people trying to cross the border because of famine, because of starvation, due to climate change that is happening. So the reality is, now if we go to 2 degrees Celsius, what does that exactly mean? Well, at 1.5 degrees Celsius, that means that your rice, your corn, is going to be very low. It's going to be significantly lower, which means that we have a higher amounts of famine around the world. 2 degrees Celsius means an increased severe famine. It also means an increased levels of not getting enough rain in this world, where people will then have to figure out, how do I get access to water? When you get to 3 degrees Celsius, what does that mean? That means that near complete melting of the Greenland ice sheet. That means now all these people that live on the coast of anywhere where there is water will now not have homes. That means there will be an increase of refugees looking for a place to live. And then at 4 degrees Celsius, well, hopefully that is never a case for us, but the reality is if we don't make changes now, if our government does not do changes now, we will hit 4.0 Celsius. If we don't do anything right now at this very moment to change our situation, we are looking at a 4 degrees Celsius within our lifetime. So as you can tell, there is definitely drastic changes when we go through these different change points. And yes, humans are the cause of climate change. This is the data that came from NASA's GRACE, which showed us that basically that Greenland and Antarctic ice sheets are losing significant amounts of land-based ice as a result of human-caused global warming. And the Intergovernmental Panel of Climate Change, the IPCC, a group of leading climate scientists convened by the United Nations, has stated that it is extremely likely that human activities have been the dominant cause of observed climate change since the mid-20th century. The IPCC's findings are based on multiple lines of evidence, including observations of the climate. Scientists have observed numerous changes in the Earth's climate, including rising temperatures, melting glaciers and sea level, and changes in precipitation patterns. These changes are consistent with the production of climate models that take into account the greenhouse gases emissions resulting from human activities. The other thing is attribution studies. Climate scientists have used statistical techniques to attribute observed changes in the climate to specific causes. And these studies have found that the warming of the planet can be attributed to human activities with high degrees of confidence. Then you have analysis of climate models. These climate models then simulate the Earth's climate and can be used to project the future climate change. Models that include the greenhouse gas emissions resulting from human activities closely match observed changes in climate. And of course, you have historical analysis as well, showing proof of human behavior causing this, because scientists have analyzed historical records of greenhouse gas concentrations, temperature, and other climate variables. And these records show that the current warming trend is unprecedented in at least the past 1,000 years, and is likely due to human activities. So overall, like I said, humans are the cause of climate change. And it's not whether or not climate change is, because it does. So a quick overview of the climate change impact in itself is that climate change will cause more frequent and severe extreme weather events such as heat waves, droughts, hurricanes, and floods. I know when we thought about climate change and global warming, we're like, well, it's not 90 degrees in the summer still, so I guess we're okay. Oh, global warming, doesn't that mean why is there snow in Texas? The reality is that's not it. Climate change, what does it bring? Severe weather. Doesn't mean that it's going to get warmer. Yes, the planet is warming, but it means you will get more severe weather. Sea levels will continue to rise from melting ice sheets and glaciers, causing coastal communities to face flooding and erosion. Agriculture and food security impacts will result from reduced crop yields, crop failures due to extreme weather, distribution changes of pests and diseases. And then climate change will impact public health, leading to increased heat-related illnesses, respiratory illnesses, and mental health issues and vector-borne diseases. One thing to know about climate change is that there are some direct linkage about how climate change can actually increase the number of pandemics that we will have in our future. Whenever we are changing the habitat of areas, bats will leave certain areas, and then that's how you get spread of other diseases. Ebola right now is a perfect example. Ebola started to spread drastically because there was trees being cut down in the forest to plant palm oil trees, on that. And because of that, they went into areas where humans are, and that's why we have Ebola once again today. Now, the displacement of communities will occur, and it's already been occurring now, due to flooding, sea level rise, and extreme weather events causing social and economic disruptions. Climate change will also have significant economic impacts, such as the damage to infrastructure and the increased costs associated with extreme weather events and supply chain disruption. And like I said earlier, I hate talking about it's not like shouting from the rooftop, like it's the end of the world. Don't think that way, right? Don't think REM, it's the end of the world as we know it. The reality is that species will not be able to live in a world in the future if it gets warmer. So, now I've talked about all the things you need to know about climate change. Let's go into what does that have anything to do with cybersecurity? Well, there is no direct causal relationship between climate change and cybersecurity, but the reality is cyber attacks. So climate change can indirectly contribute to the increase in cyber attacks. And here are some potential scenarios, for example. With extreme weather events, climate change can cause more frequent severe weather events, such as hurricanes, floods, and wildfires. These events can damage physical infrastructure, including data centers, servers, and critical IT systems. If these systems are not properly secured or maintained, they can become vulnerable to cyber attacks. You have disruptions to supply chains. Climate change can also disrupt global supply chains, particularly for industries that rely on raw materials, energy, and transportation. When supply chains are disrupted, businesses may turn to alternative suppliers or adopt new technologies to maintain production levels. These changes can create new vulnerabilities in the supply chain that cybercriminals can exploit, and we do have examples of that already happening today. We also have the increased remote work. In response to COVID-19, the pandemic, many businesses had to shift to remote work overnight. And this trend is likely to continue in the future, particularly as climate change makes extreme weather events more frequent. Remote work can create new security risks, such as unsecure home networks or personal devices that are used for work purposes. And I just want to reiterate, burnout will definitely be on the rise if you're working from home and there's all these shifts and new pandemics happening. Another potential way in which climate change could lead to more cyber attacks is through the use of green technologies, such as renewable energy sources and electronic vehicles. These techs can become more widespread, but they're likely to be on interconnected networks and systems, which then can create new opportunities for cyber criminals to exploit these vulnerabilities. But in general, for the growing use of electronic vehicles, this will require a network of charging stations, which will need to be connected to the grid and managed by a central system. If this system is not properly secured, it could become vulnerable to cyber attacks that could disrupt the charging network and potentially even cause power outages. Similarly, renewable energy sources such as solar and wind power will require sophisticated monitoring and control systems to ensure that they're operating efficiently and reliably. These systems could also be vulnerable to cyber attacks that could cause disruptions or damage to the energy grid. Now, the area that I'm always thinking about is nation-state cyber attacks. This is an area in climate change that could have indirect impacts. For example, climate change could lead to a geopolitical instability, which can cause an increased likelihood of nation-state cyber attacks. As climate change exacerbates resource scarcity, population displacement, and economic disruption, this could create new tensions and conflicts between nations. And these tensions could spill over into the cyber realm, with nation states using cyber attacks as means of exerting influence, disrupting critical infrastructure, or stealing sensitive information. Furthermore, as nations seek to mitigate the impacts of climate change, they may increasingly turn to cyber espionage and cyber attacks to gain access to new technologies and intellectual property related to clean energy and climate adaptation. Overall, while the relationship between climate change and nation-state cyber attacks is complex of its own, and it's not well understood at this very moment, and we will over time, of course, but it's clear that climate change is likely to have far-reaching impacts on global security and geopolitical dynamics ever before. And this is why it's important for us to have these conversations, because it's not going to go away. Because there are already cases of climate change impacting cybersecurity as we know it. For example, Hurricane Sandy. This is what happened. An increased risk of cyber attacks do occur during extreme weather events, such as extreme weather events as hurricanes and floods. And this can disrupt critical infrastructure, leaving organizations vulnerable to cyber attacks, which happened during Hurricane Sandy in 2012 because several major data centers were affected, leading to disruptions in internet services and increased risk of cyber attacks. With rising sea levels and coastal erosion, this can cause damage to critical infrastructure, such as undersea cables, which are essential for global communication and commerce. And this damage of these cables can lead to these disruptions in internet connectivity and an increased risk of cyber attacks. And that's what we saw in 2018 with an earthquake that hit with a tsunami in Indonesia, which damaged the undersea cables and disrupted internet connectivity, including mobile networks and also financial transactions. And then you can also see increased risks of cyber attacks on water management systems. So climate change can lead to water scarcity, because that will occur, which can increase the reliance on water management systems. But the thing is, these systems are vulnerable to cyber attacks as we know it at this very moment. And when these are vulnerable, this can disrupt water supplies and create public health risks, which we saw in 2016 when there was a cyber attack on a water treatment system in Ukraine, which led to a temporary shutdown of water supply to over 700,000 people. Now, the thing is, of course, climate change can disrupt our global supply chains, leading to increased risk of cyber attacks on our supply chain, and that's what we saw in 2011 when it came to the flooding in Thailand, which disrupted a global supply chains for computer hard drives, leading to increased risk of cyber attacks as organizations turn to alternative suppliers. So, yeah, climate change and security, it's a complex and multifaceted situation and relationship. But the thing is, climate change can lead to disruptions that impact our critical infrastructure, such as data centers, energy grids, and transportation system. And these disruptions can create cybersecurity risks, such as power outages, damages to infrastructure, and communication network failures. Now, let's talk about that. climate change increases cybersecurity risk in general. With extreme weather events, climate change can lead to more frequent severe weather events as we know it, such as hurricanes and floods and wildfires, and these can damage critical infrastructure and leaving organizations vulnerable to cyber attacks. For example, a hurricane or flood can knock out power to a data center or disrupt internet connectivity, making it easier for cyber criminals to launch attacks. But water scarcity, climate change can lead to that water scarcity, as we saw in the example, in certain regions, and this can increase the reliance on water management systems, and these are vulnerable to attacks because the reality is that it is the thing that helps keep our water supply not contaminated. But this could also be a situation where it can become contaminated in the water supply and cause widespread illness. And then we have, of course, our supply chain disruptions as we know it, because a disruption in the production of computer components could lead to organizations turn to alternative suppliers, which once again will make it vulnerable to cyber attacks. But then you have increased use of cloud services as organizations turn to cloud services to reduce their carbon footprint as they think that they are. We'll get to that in a bit, but they may be exposing themselves to new cybersecurity risks, and cloud providers may not have the same level of cybersecurity measures in place as traditional data centers, making it a little bit easier maybe for cyber criminals to access sensitive data. And of course, social engineering attacks. Do you all remember the pandemic? How many of you guys got a scam email or a text message? Raise your hand. How many did you get your parents and you told them, no, don't click on the link? Many people in our organizations actually fell for these traps, thinking that, oh, I could go get the vaccine early if I just click on this link. And the reality is, social engineering attacks, they happen when we're having a little bit of chaos. It's easier, right? So cyber criminals may send these phishing emails to victims of a natural organization, providing relief efforts to the victims of natural disasters, which then tricks people into giving their personal information for making fraudulent donations. It does continue here. Climate change still does all these other things, such as that migration displacement. For example, displaced people may have limited access to secure communication channels, making them vulnerable to cyber attacks such as phishing and identity theft, but also because our colleagues will have to move eventually if they live in Florida. But also the increase of remote work, as we know, has been an issue for us during the pandemic because we don't know how secure the networks or devices are in their home, which can make it vulnerable for us and organizations if we don't have the right things set up. But political instability is one of those things that we have to really keep an eye on, including the economic impacts, because economic impacts will happen because organizations will cut back on cybersecurity spending because if they don't have spending to do, as we have noticed even in today's day. But political instability in countries where it's unstable, as we know, cyber attacks can be used as a tool of political repression or to destabilize the government. Another way that climate change can increase cybersecurity risk is through the growing use of Internet of Things, IoT devices, such as sensors and smart home appliances are increasingly being used to monitor and manage climate-related risks, such as water and air quality. However, these devices are often insecure and vulnerable to cyber attacks, which can be used to gain access to other parts of networks to collect sensitive data, which we saw in 2016 with the Mirai botnet, which was used to launch a distributed DDoS attack that took down large portions of the internet. And this botnet was made up of IoT devices that had been infected with malware, highlighting the vulnerability of these devices to cyber attacks. As the use of IoT devices are going to continue to grow in response to climate change related risks, it's important for organizations and manufacturers to ensure that these devices are secure and not vulnerable to cyber attacks. And of course that means, doing the right things, implementing strong encryption, authentication protocols, regular software updates, and properly configuration of management to reduce the risk of IoT devices being used as a gateway for cyber attacks. And now we're going to go through these things such as reduce risks. You should all be doing this anyway, but I know in here, I'll be realistic, we're not doing that. Let's be real. We're so overwhelmed. We have so much work we have to do all the time. We don't have enough hours in a day, and we're working probably 70 plus hours a week. And the reality is that if you want to reduce these risks, you can conduct risk assessments, of course. You can develop cybersecurity plans, of course. You can implement strong encryption and authentication protocols. You can educate your employees about what climate change can do. But you can also collaborate with other organizations that are doing stuff about climate change to give you up to date what's going on. And you can always develop your business continuity plan, which you should already have. But once again, let's be realistic in this room. We don't have these things, most of us. Yes, we do stay up to date on emerging threats and vulnerabilities, but once again, our organizations, our departments, and our security teams, we are burnt out and overwhelmed. We do not have enough support. We do not have financial support either. And as a return of it, we're not up to date on emerging threats and vulnerabilities. We let the tools help us as much as possible. Do you know that the average cybersecurity company, well, not company, but department, runs on at least 20 tools? And a lot of times we don't even have that in noting which ones we actually use and if they're up to date. And when it comes to our incident response planning, let's be real with each other, only 73% don't have one. We will usually go ad hoc if we have an attack. And so this is one of those things. We are not prepared for anything, really, when it comes to climate change. We don't even talk about it. This is probably the first talk you've ever gone to on climate change and cybersecurity. And of course, having partnerships with law enforcement and government agencies, these are all great ways to reduce risks. But the one thing I want to get into in particularly is we're kind of the problem here too. Any Swifties in the audience? Raise your hand. Who's the Swifties in here? Okay, so you understand that quote right there, right? Yeah. Yeah, we're kind of the problem sometimes, which is unfortunate because we shouldn't be the problem to do this. And we're going to dive in some of those. So the first issue is data centers. So electricity consumption of our industry, including computer data centers, is a significant and often relies on fossil fuels such as coal, which generates large amounts of planet-warming emissions. And while many of us own our own plug-in hybrid or electronic vehicles like a Tesla, how many of you guys have a Tesla in here? Raise your hand. Don't worry, I'm not going to poke a joke or anything, I promise. I know there's Teslas in this room. Come on. We're all in tech. One of us has to have a Tesla in this room. Okay, what about plugins? Yeah? Okay, so we have plugins, right? Now, the one thing to note about our plugins is considering the electricity used to charge these vehicles and how it is generated. So in the US in general, true fact about this is that 60% of electricity comes from fossil fuels. So when you're charging your Tesla or your plug-in, because there's Teslas in this room, okay, when you plug that in, you're like, yeah, I'm driving this eco-friendly car. Just remember this one thing, when you're plugging it in, you're thinking this is really good for the environment when we're not even considering how did we get that charge in the first place, and if it's from fossil fuels, are we doing a good enough job here, people? No, we're not. In the state of California, yeah, we have more solar and we have wind power and everything, but there's other states right now that still uses a good amount of coal. And this is a huge problem because 20% is, in the US alone, is sourced from coal. So data centers in particular are known to be power intrusive, which means it's consuming about 200 terawatt hours of electricity annually and contributing about 0.3% of CO2 emissions into the atmosphere, which is more than the emissions of some entire countries. And as per the US Environmental Protection Agency, the EPA, the largest source of greenhouse gas emissions from human activities in the US is burning of fossil fuels for electricity, heat, and transportation. But one of these things is e-waste and mining. And additionally, how many of you guys have two phones? Raise your hand. All right. How many of you guys in here, whenever the latest iPhone comes out, you're like the first one in line? Raise your hand. Once again, I know there are people in here that exist and have that. Come on, let's be real with each other, you know? Everything that happens stays in here. Really, not like Vegas. But the reality is that e-waste and mining is a huge situation. I wish that right to repair would be a bigger thing at this time because this could help us significantly if I could fix my iPhone so I don't have to replace it. But hello, Pixel. So when considering the impact of electronic goods on climate change, it's important to recognize the significant carbon footprint. The production of just 1 ton of laptops can result in the emission of up to, can someone guess the number? Shout them out. How many tons of CO2 do you think it does? I got a 3, what else? 10. You are correct. I wish I had candy to give. But personal computers, laptops, and smartphones and tablets, as well as our digital infrastructure, such as data centers and communication networks, are projected to contribute about 14% of the global carbon footprint by 2040, accounting for over half a total contribution from transportation. Furthermore, e-waste, when exposed to heat, does release toxic chemicals into the air, causing a damage to the atmosphere and potentially contaminating groundwater and harming land and sea animals. Say hello to dolphins, say goodbye to dolphins. Come on, we love dolphins here. E-waste can also contribute to air pollution, of course. Now, in addition to mining of rare materials used in technology, often involves adults and children working without proper safety measures. How many of you guys have children under the age of 10? How many? Okay, cool. Okay, how many in this room have children under the age of 6? Okay. Now, the thing to think about is 6-year-olds, they're like about this height, right? Okay. Now, when they have to go and mine in certain areas, the hole's about this big, okay? They have to go into these tunnels and sometimes drop down. And they go in there to get you the materials for your iPhone or for your Tesla. The reality is that mining, you need children to get to these places because it's hard to get to it. And we don't think about that. And also, I'm pretty sure they don't have good safety measures in these certain areas. Also, breaks or fair wages, you know, it could be modern day slavery for them. And the other thing is that they're exposed to violence and hazards, of course. Now, rare earth elements, these REEs, they're also used in high-tech devices, including your smartphones, your cameras, and television, and those definitely need kids. But additionally, sometimes they don't need kids, okay? And the production of REEs require mining through wastewater and solid waste, resulting in acidification of soil and groundwater from wastewater, and this generation of radioactive materials and heavy metal contamination from solid waste. In fact, for every ton of rare earth produced, the mining process generates about 13 kilograms of dust, which is 9,600 to 12,000 cubic meters. In other words, we should all be pushing for the right to repair right now, right? And I know we're all here today for this special occasion. How many of you guys flew? Raise your hand. Okay, cool. How many of you guys drove here? Okay, and those that drove here, did you drive with someone in the car with you? Okay, so this may be interesting for you because, you know, when we come to these conferences, we don't really think about what does that mean for our carbon footprint, right? But the reality is that transportation is the significant contributor to climate change in the US alone because it's the primary source of greenhouse gas emissions. For instance, according to the EPA, a typical passenger vehicle emits about 4.6 metric tons of carbon dioxide per year. In comparison, a round-trip flight in economy class from New York to LA produces approximately 0.62 tons of CO2 per passenger. As calculated by the UN's International Civil Aviation Organization, this is the ICAO, their carbon calculator, which means that a single long flight is equivalent to nearly 14% of the annual emissions from your car. If the same distance was driven by a car, it would result in the release of 1.26 tons of carbon emissions. Now that was a lot of stats right there and numbers, so I'm gonna make it very easy for you. If you flew here, it's not as bad as you may think. It's actually still bad, let's be honest. But we have to get here somehow, right? If you drove here, if you drove with another person in the car with you, congratulations, you did something better for your CO2 emissions. So if you're ever going to think of, okay, if I want to do a road trip to LA from San Francisco, do it with someone in the car with you, because actually that's better for the environment than to fly there. Now, swag. Okay, all right, okay. I know. I love one of the things that I love about this field is in the hacker space, we get a lot of stickers, we get our challenge coins, we get our shirts on, we collect these badges of honor, and how many of you guys got your backpack today? Yeah, we all got our backpack today. Now, I know we love our swag so much in this industry, and I know that afterwards, maybe later today or tomorrow, you're gonna go and pick up your more swag, right? For me, I'm a sucker for stuffed animals. If I see a stuffed animal on that show floor, I will be like, take my business card. You can call me on my cell phone. Here you go. Just give me that. I need to give it to my dogs because they get upset whenever I leave them. But the reality is that a lot of them contain plastic. And when we have plastic in our shirts, such as Raylon and polyester, one thing to note is it takes about 400 to 1,000 years to decompose. So think about it this way. That means that your great times by 40 grandchild will still be able to hold that plastic water bottle that you picked up because you were thirsty. That's what I'm talking about here. We don't talk about this enough because the reality is that plastic is not biodegradable. We're terrible at recycling in general. And so at the same time, so when we throw these plastic things out, it goes into the sun contributes to that carbon emissions, and that's when we get into this disaster zone. So if you see over here, you see all that garbage in that little picture right there in the top left side? That's all plastic, okay? And how that plastic gets in there is that, trash will always end up in our water supply. No matter what, it's gonna end up in our rivers, it'll end up in our creeks, it'll end up into our bays, it'll then end up into our oceans. And how the currents flow is that they all tend to go to the Pacific Ocean because, it's close to California, and California is awesome as a local Californian person, but unfortunately that means that we have twice the size of Texas of a garbage patch in our Pacific Ocean. And that's all from plastic. Even if you throw it away, it's gonna end up there. And that's a sad thing, because if you think about it, that means of those dolphins, those sea turtles, they're not gonna have a really good time. But you know what? They're swallowing a lot of plastic, just like you and I. Did you know that, your credit card, your credit card's like this big, right? Right? Yeah, okay. It's about 5 grams of plastic, right? And what I mean by that is that you are literally swallowing a credit card worth of plastic every single week. Every single week, we are swallowing a credit card size of weight of amount of plastic. And when we think of, you know what, Chloe, it's okay. I'm only gonna pick out shirts. It'll be fine. I will make sure that I get shirts. Now, the thing to know about shirts is that whenever we donate our shirts, we think we're doing a really good cause here, but in reality, it's not really a good cause at all. The best cause that we can do is less is more. Don't buy more, don't pick up more, because the reality is that then it ends up in illegal areas of Chile where it just sits there. Like that landfill over there in the far right in Chile. That's where all your donated clothes go to, or your fast fashion companies and also high fashion companies. So your Dior, your Chanel, and all those, we were thinking they make less, so it might be good for the environment. No, this is how they keep their prices. You ready for this? So they don't put things on sale because they want to keep their brand and their image and the price. So what they do is that if anything does not sell, they either burn it or they send it to Chile in a dump. And that's how your clothes stay that price if you buy it from them. Now, the other thing is cryptocurrency. How many of you guys have cryptocurrency? Raise your hand. Okay, I know a lot more of you guys have crypto. It's okay, I get it. But the reality is crypto asset activity in the US is estimated to contribute to approximately 25 to 50 million metric tons of CO2 emissions per year, which represents 0.4% to 0.8% of the country's total greenhouse gas emissions. Another estimate indicates that cryptocurrency mining in the US results in an excess of 27.4 million metric tons of CO2 emissions between mid-2021 and 2022. That's a very short period of time. But within that is 3 times the emissions of the largest coal plant in the US in 2021. Now AI, I know I love my ChatGPT, I don't know about you, but the thing is that AI has been a great thing and will continue to probably do a really good thing, but the reality is that when we do use AI, and training a single AI system, this can result in emitting over 250,000 pounds of carbon dioxide, contributing to carbon emissions at a level comparable to the aviation industry. For instance, Google researchers found that AI accounted for 10 to 15% of the company's total electricity consumption, which amounted to 18.3 terawatt hours in 2021, highlighting the significant energy footprint of AI technology across various sectors. Now, here we go into the controversial one. Okay, let's be real with each other. Issue number 7, we don't talk about it. And I know parents in this room, you're going to hate me because I'm about to bring up a very tragic moment for you, which is when your kids watch Encanto multiple times and they kept singing, you know, that one song on repeat. We don't talk about Bruno. You know, we don't talk about Bruno. Yeah, now it's going through your head. You're going to go to bed in your hotel room and then be like, damn it, Chloe, it's stuck in my head. Because I always think of that song when I think about climate change. In our industry, we don't talk about it at all. And this may be because of a lack of awareness, of course. You know, cybersecurity leaders may not be fully aware of the connection between it because a lot of us don't see a connection between it. Your organizational focus, maybe you're more into the conservative way of protecting, so you just look at the current, you know, reactive results of how our industry is instead of being proactive. Now, political sensitivity, unfortunately, climate change should not be a political thing. It shouldn't even be politicized, which is unfortunate because science is, you know, facts, and when we learn from facts, sometimes they change, but it's because we have new evidence of it, and we address that. So we change because of the things that we learn. And now it's become politicized, and it shouldn't be, because the reality is that when we have that, that means change is going to come a lot slower, and it becomes more scary for future generations. But also resource constraints, of course. You know, we don't have a lot of money. We don't have a lot of resources sometimes when we're talking about security in our departments. But also the lack of regulations or standards. There really isn't any of that for us when it comes to climate change. So how can we reduce our industry's carbon footprint? So you could do this yourself, and it does take each one of us to know our carbon footprint. So this is a really cool thing you could do. It's called footprintcalculator.org. Let me just tell you, it's not going to be as immersive as you think it would. It doesn't take in, you know, information where you're located or anything like that. But the thing to keep in mind is that it does give you an idea of how many Earths it would take for you to survive. In other words, do you take 4 Earths or do you take 2 Earths or maybe 7 Earths by the way that you work? And then for companies, there's a way you can calculate your emissions through that. Another thing is to promote remote work and reduce travel. That means, you know, conferences, having a remote option is always a good thing. But adopting green technologies and renewable energy sources are really important for us too, and promoting policies and regulations that support sustainable practices. Now, creating cybersecurity solutions. So there has been some talk, but not within our industry, of trying to figure out, well, how can cybersecurity help when it comes to this? And one is smart grid cybersecurity. So, you know, one of the things that we can do is that transitioning to a smart grid, which enables great integration of renewable energy sources and demand responses technologies, will require a robust cybersecurity measures to protect against cyber attacks that could disrupt the grid. The cybersecurity industry can develop solutions that ensure that security of a smart grid technologies such as advanced metering, infrastructure, and distribution automation systems are intact, but also green IT cybersecurity. So there has been talks about, you know, IT industry is a significant consumer of energy, and the more we move to sustainable practices such as cloud and computing and virtualization, this can help reduce our energy consumption. And cybersecurity industry can develop solutions that ensure that the security of these technologies, such as encryption and access controls, are protected against cyber attacks that can disrupt critical businesses. But then you have the cybersecurity sustainable transportation, making sure that our transportation is safe and creating whatever we can to ensure that it's safe as well. But one of the things I really want to talk about is raising awareness. We have to start talking about it. We don't talk about it. And the reality is that by not raising awareness of the situation and the play that we are in, this could become a problem. So you've now had a conversation, you've learned a little bit about how we could do better, and this would be one way I would go it. The other one is an engage in stakeholders. Now the thing is that risk assessment is something that does occur throughout your businesses, and so it's really good to be in that room to engage with those stakeholders when they're making decisions. And one in particular that you should note of is ESG. How many of you guys are familiar with ESG? Okay, so your environmental, social governance, and these are frameworks, various frameworks of ways to know what your materiality is and to map your goals out. But it's a good way to do risk management. Using ESG, actually companies tend to do much better if they do meet into a situation where something goes down, they know how to handle it. And that's why ESG has been used when it comes to VCs when they're trying to fund, or when there's ever a time where you want to know what are the risk management that I need to do. But the unfortunate about these ESG frameworks is that cybersecurity is not in them usually. Maybe there's like one or two things in it. And this is a problem because if cybersecurity is not part of that risk management process already, that means that our companies will fail at managing a situation if we're not in the room. We should be in the room when they're talking about climate change and how that's going to risk their business. And the first thing we have to do is get in the room. We need to be in the room when it comes to cyber attacks, possibly in the future, but also we need to be in the room when they're talking about the materiality that they need to cover. And since we know those frameworks for ESG that they are using, because if they're a public company, they are supposed to use ESG frameworks. And if we're not in the room when they're making these decisions, then we're not protecting our organization, and our organization does not have our back when it comes to security. But also being there for your team is incredibly important when we're going through something changing like this, as we have learned from a pandemic. So you now know the latest of climate change and how to address it. An overview of it is just, you need to just do the basic things that you already should be doing, by including adding that advocacy part, but that emotional support too, because your team is going to need it, and they need it now anyway. Because if we don't change, mass migration, food and water shortages, spread of deadly diseases, endless wildfires, storms that have power to level cities, blacken out the sky, and create permanent darkness is something that unfortunately we may see in our world, in our generation, or in the next generation. So the three takeaways is from this conversation is to be that leader, push yourself in that room. You need to be in that room when it comes to risk management. You should be in that room anyway. And if they're not, you've got to set it up so they understand that you need to be in that room. But also focus on building resilience in your systems and also ensuring that your team can withstand the impacts of climate change for when it does happen, like those 20 tornadoes in 2 days, but also to reduce your carbon footprint as a whole. We have to do better, because change is possible. And the one quick change I can always tell you that it is possible is that in the 1980s, we saw a huge hole in our ozone layer. This is probably because we used a lot of hairspray in the 70s and the 60s and definitely in the 80s. I remember those hairs, those perms, and oh geez. But there's these things called CFCs, chlorofluorocarbons. I hope I said that right. But CFCs were the cause of the ozone layer getting bigger and bigger, this massive hole, which could cause a mass amount of skin cancer and other issues. But the thing is that by the mid-80s, governments around the world came together and scientists saying we have to do something about this because humanity needs to survive and continue. And so they came together, and that was when the Montreal Protocol was founded and formed. And in return of that, to this day, the ozone layer is almost fully filled because we came together and we worked across. So hope is there. We can always make a change and a difference, but we cannot make a change or a difference if we don't talk about it. So we are going to have to get uncomfortable to make sure that we have a change. So there's a future generations beyond us where they don't have to worry about the things that you have heard in this presentation. So I just want to say thank you all for existing. Thank you, RSA Conference, for being here. Reach out anytime. I'll be here to answer any questions afterwards. I know we're at time, but feel free to reach out. I'm on Instagram, LinkedIn, Twitter. That's my handle. And also feel free to visit my website if you want to learn more about the work that I do. Thank you all so much.